Good evening, everyone. My name is Caroline Bowman, and I am the acting director of Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum. Thank you to everyone in the room tonight. It's wonderful to be together. I'm especially joyful that Bill Moggridge can be with us tonight. Over 1,000 people actually RSVP'd for this event, and the first thing I thought of was Charles and Ray Eames' Power of 10. Add a few zeros, and you might begin to get close to the number of people that Bill Moggridge affected during his lifetime of designing and living life to its fullest. It is now my honor to introduce the 12th Secretary of the Smithsonian, Wayne Clough.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank all of you for being here, friends and family of Bill, to remember and celebrate his life. Bill had touched us in so many ways, but I couldn't help but think, when you saw that slide particularly, he really could pull off wearing a T-shirt. And I'm not sure, I tried, I never quite got there. I don't think I ever saw Bill with one of these things on either. He wore those string ties, and he had such a line when he did that, and I haven't even gotten there yet. I miss him too because he had one of these, and so Bill and I could commiserate in ways that others could not. He was a great friend and a leader, and we all know a design innovator. And of course he was funny, and he was fun to be around. He was joyful. And yes, at times at the Smithsonian we can be accused of being stiff and stodgy, but he was a perpetual pin to deflate our pomposity. He focused on the important things. In the book by Jim Collins, Good to Great, he said it's important to get the right people on the bus. Bill Moggridge was the right person at the right time for the Smithsonian and the Cooper-Hewitt. He came on in a time of major renovation of the Cooper-Hewitt, and I think it's fair to say that he curated and renovated the renovation. He always had change in mind, and positive change and creative change. He asked insiders and outsiders for counsel and creativity, and he brought things to the process himself at all times. That was Bill. He asked questions, and he listened carefully. So his impact on Cooper-Hewitt and the design world, of course, will be felt for decades to come. In his 2 years as director of the museum, Bill worked to establish the Cooper-Hewitt as a preeminent design museum resource and enhance its leading profile as the world's leading authority on the role of design in everyday life and develop exhibitions real and virtual. His expertise informed plans to make design stories come alive with multiple interactive components focusing on the design process, transforming the museum visit from passive to participatory. Bill was an inspiration. He was a breath of fresh air who infused creative energy into any discussion. And that was true across the Smithsonian. He was a leader for us across the Smithsonian, not just here at this museum. He never had to bang on the table. He wasn't that type of person. He didn't have to. He had the gravitas. He led by example, and he affected everyone he met. His ego was inversely related to his accomplishments, which were enormous. He was a leader among leaders for all of us, and his impact will ripple forward in many ways across many disciplines. He helped us set up a number of cross-collaborative initiatives that will be ongoing at the Smithsonian for years to come. As individuals, myself, speaking personally, and as an institution, we will miss Bill. A couple of weeks ago, Caroline had a story in the New York Times about typesetting and the glamorous labels that grand hotels used to put on suitcases long ago. It was an interesting story that greatly increased the traffic on the Cooper-Hewitt website. And I couldn't help but imagine what Bill's travel bags might look like with such labels. Naturally, they would be covered, his bags would be covered in colorful labels from all over the world because he was a traveler of the world and a citizen of the world. Voyaging from afar, observing, involving, and always returning with new ideas. His unique way of looking at the world inspired us all. We will miss him. I now look at the world differently because I knew Bill, and the world looks different because of him. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Bill was cherished by everyone at Cooper-Hewitt. Bill's design talks were one of Bill's favorite activities because they were all about engaging the speakers, asking the right questions, and hearing what they had to say. So in that spirit, each speaker tonight will be sharing a Bill Moggridge anecdote. Having spent nearly 2 years working side by side with Bill, I had trouble picking just a few. But hopefully my memories will illustrate Bill during his days with all of us at Cooper-Hewitt and reiterate Bill's unique approach as a legendary designer coming in as the director of the museum. Bill cared deeply about knowing the staff and the staff knowing each other. Last summer, at a staff party in the garden, Bill initiated a project whereby staff be photographed with his or her favorite object. Staff had great fun posing for these. You had your choice of a traditional or contemporary frame, and now the selection of staff photographs is displayed for all to enjoy and ultimately learn more about one another. As an example, Bill balanced a spoon from his favorite Ettore Sottsa's cutlery collection on his finger to show how well-crafted and thoughtfully weighted it was. As many of you know from reading his book, Designing Interactions, in the touch chapter, he said, "An elegant shape may be the first thing that appeals to you when you are looking at cutlery on a table or in a store. But the difference between a spoon that you enjoy using repeatedly and one that you come to ignore is much more than love at first sight." Bill said that he planned to pose for his portrait with an array of different sized spoons splayed out between his fingers in one hand to show the different sizes for different uses. Classic Bill. For our Christmas party in 2011, Bill surprised me and Julie Barnes, campaign coordinator, by printing out on our plotter and wearing what looked like papal garments, but actually represented the Capital Campaign thermometer exploding to represent our hitting goal. And more than that, he paraded into the Great Hall with a few courageous colleagues in song that he had composed, congratulating us on the close of the Capital Campaign, which is making the current renovation possible. He knew what kind of accomplishment this was and celebrated the many years of effort that went into making it happen in an unforgettable manner. On a personal note, Bill would surprise me Monday mornings by asking me how my tennis matches had been, applauding any victories, or defeats for that matter, and then he'd describe to me his explorations of Manhattan outer boroughs on his bike. It was so refreshing to not dive into the museum business of the day right away. The leadership, the humanity, the levity, the humor. Bill created a whole new spirit at Cooper-Hewitt that continues and will continue as we move on without him. He left us with the invaluable lesson of the importance of community and finding the joy in human interactions and our daily exchanges. As the Cooper-Hewitt team moves ahead with the grand reopening plans for the museum, it's still hard to believe that Bill isn't with us, and we celebrate Bill's huge contribution. Bill really loved Cooper-Hewitt. More than once on my visits to him when he was ill, he'd immediately ask me about museum activities and news. We look forward to unveiling the national and global design resource that Bill dreamed of and that we will realize in the Cooper-Hewitt of 2014. Thank you. Bill's sons couldn't be here tonight, but they worked on a wonderful video, and I'm very honored to introduce the short video made by Alex Moggridge.
Hello, everyone in New York. It's Alex Moggridge here. I just wanted to say on behalf of Eric, my brother, and myself, we're both very sad that we can't be there for today's event. And we both also wanted to extend our thanks to the Cooper-Hewitt for throwing the event, and for everyone for coming to the event, and also, of course, to the panelists for being here or there and talking today about Dad and his design legacy. Eric and I were talking a little bit about how we saw Dad as a designer, and maybe how his designer sense applied to his fathering. And I mean, I think one of his qualities that I think will probably be talked about a lot today is his sort of why not? Let's get things done. His amazing ability to just to do things and to be positive and to make decisions and follow through with them. And I think Eric and I agree that one of the best examples of that from our childhood was when Eric was about 13 years old, just discovering his lifelong obsession with heavy metal. Those of you who know Eric now know that Eric remains very much a headbanger, as they say, and it was right around in the 80s and right around Eric's early teens that he was really becoming obsessed with certain artists, including Ozzy Osbourne. Our dog was called Ozzy, and our cat was called Osbourne. Not scarred at all, actually very charming pets. Anyway, but that's beside the point. So Eric was also quite obsessed with Randy Rhoads, who was Ozzy's guitarist. He was this amazing young virtuoso guitarist. And Randy Rhoads' best guitar was his Flying V with polka dots. A pretty amazing looking guitar, as I'm sure you will agree. Dad took note of that. He took note of Eric's obsession with Ozzy Osbourne, with Randy Rhoads, and interestingly, that guitar. And once again, Dad's attitude of, well, why not make it, came into play. He basically just said, well, why don't we just make one? And they took one of Eric's old guitars, an old Les Paul copy. They took it to the Stanford wood shop. And Eric tells me that they just spent the day there cutting this guitar, adding new pieces of wood that were very carefully cut, gluing them together, putting a small piece of wood around the guitar, then doing a pretty immaculate paint job. And the result was this pretty amazing guitar. As you can see, it's a little bit out of service now, but it remains a real trophy for Eric. And the word Eric used was rad. And I think we all can agree, I hope we can all agree, that this is one rad guitar. So there are many other stories of Dad's sort of attitude towards just getting stuff done, but also his incredible passion for aesthetics. But Eric and I both agree that this is the best one. So once again, thank you all for being here, and thanks to Cooper-Hewitt for the event. And both Eric and I wish we were there, but we will be watching the video stream of it. So we're kind of there with you anyway. Okay. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you, Alex and Eric, and wherever you are with us. That was really quite beautiful. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Helen Walters, writer and researcher at Dublin, part of the Monitor Group, a contributing editor at Creative Review magazine in the UK, and former editor of Innovation and Design at Bloomberg Businessweek. Over to you.
Thanks, Caroline. Thank you so much. Thanks. Hi. Hello. Oh, thank you. So first and foremost, I don't promise not to cry, so you're just going to have to deal with that, so thank you for that in advance. And actually, I don't want to stand here. I want to sit there, and I want to bring the panelists on immediately. So if you would please welcome, and then I'll do more formal intros when they're all here, David Kelley from IDEO, Bruce Nussbaum, Bill Buxton, and Helen Lupton. Thank you. So that's better. I feel better with compatriots on the stage. So first and foremost, I did want to say that I am just deeply, deeply honored and privileged to be here and to be asked to be in this role of moderator at this enormously meaningful event. I cannot pretend to have known Bill for half as long or as well as anybody on this stage, let alone probably most of you in this audience. But I was deeply honored to have met him and to have played a small part in his life, and he played an enormous role in my life. I had obviously known him as a design writer and journalist across the years, but really got to know him a little better when he and Karen moved to New York, and I was privileged to be a part of one of the Bill's design talks that were mentioned earlier. And it was just enormously meaningful. So thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of these proceedings. And I promise not to overtake the stage, because frankly, I'm more interested in what everybody else has to say. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce everybody with a little bit more detail. Helen Lupton, on my far right. You'll know her by the fact that she's the lady on the stage. I am also a lady, that is true, but I... Damn it! Ellen is more of a lady than I am. I'm from Sheffield, for heaven's sakes. Ellen is the senior curator of contemporary design at the Cooper-Hewitt, and she's been responsible for installations and exhibitions such as the graphic design now in production that was held last summer on Governor's Island. I don't know if any of you had a chance to go to that. It was a really amazing exhibition. Ellen is also an educator and a writer and an editor in her own right. She runs the MFA in graphic design at the Maryland Institute College of Art. I had to write that down. And she's just an all-round doyen of design. Bill Buxton is now in my bad books, but sits to Ellen's left. He is a principal researcher at Microsoft Research and is also a hugely influential and well-known designer and technologist. He wrote the beautiful book, Sketching User Experiences, and he's been thinking and pushing the boundaries and challenging us all to think newly and differently about design for the last 20 or so years. He has more honorary doctorates than you can shake a stick at, and he also has a mouth on him, so we'll watch him with interest. Bruce Nussbaum is actually my old boss, so it's lovely to see you, Bruce. Bruce was the founding editor of the Innovation and Design Department at Business Week, at which I worked, and was really instrumental in, as a force within the business press, of really understanding and pushing the power of design more broadly beyond the design press itself. His latest oeuvre is a book called Creative Intelligence, which will be published in March, and he was just showing me the cover backstage, and it looks beautiful. So that's Bruce. And then finally, and probably needing no introduction whatsoever, is David Kelley from IDEO, the co-founder with Bill of IDEO back in 1991. And David has been instrumental in a million different ways and a million different places, but one that comes to mind is his work at Stanford, where he's been teaching for the last 20 years, I think, and has been instrumental in founding and in supporting the D.school and the work at the D.school to kind of think more deeply and more integratively about design thinking and how to integrate design into the world at large. So that is our panel. And I wanted to start with you, David, because you, I think, have the honor of having known Bill for the longest.
On the stage, maybe there's a woman down there who probably knows him longer.
Well, that's true. That's true. Karen does win. But actually, I wanted to pick up on what Alex had said in his video. And it's something that deeply resonated with me and is actually one of the reasons that I moved from England to America. And it's the difference between English people and Americans. And English people hate it when I say this, so I'm glad I'm in New York. Is that in England, the response to any question will be, well, why do you want to do that? And the response in America to a question is, sure, why not? And that question of why not is what Alex had picked up on, and it's something that I think is so important. And I'd just love you to speak about Bill's spirit and that kind of idea.
Yeah, it's really hard, we've done a memorial for Bill in San Francisco, and it's really hard to convey just what a special person he was. I mean, hopefully in this panel we'll talk about his contribution to design, which is staggering, and certainly in my own life and my own company, working alongside of Bill, he really kind of knew what the future was going to bring, and so it was in some ways easy for him to say, okay, let's do this, because he somehow had an uncanny sense of what was going to happen. But it's hard to convey just what a special purpose he was. The secretary, I thought, did a good job. But one of the things that's nice is I was thinking, how am I going to convince an audience just what a lovely person Bill was? And then I look around, there's so many of his friends in the audience, I don't have to do that. So if you don't know Bill well, turn to the person next to you and stuff. But the thing about Bill, unlike most British people stereotypically, I'm not besmirching the
No,
whole
it's fine.
country,
It's fine.
is that, well, just look at from IDEO's point of view how much more difficult it is to convince a British client to hire us than an American one, is just how incredibly genuinely positive he was, and how he was so fixated on you learning something. When so he taught at Stanford alongside of me for many years, and at IDEO he was just this kind of teacher person. This person who was so generous with his willingness to understand who you were and then help you. I mean, we were talking about telling anecdotes. I was thinking backstage, there's 1,000 anecdotes that I want to tell, and they're all about Bill treating me specially, and everybody has those. That's why it's neat that there's so many of his friends in his audience. When I first met Bill and Karen, I was in a machine shop, and they came in, and I was working on a lathe, and Bill and Karen came on the other side of the lathe in about 79 or something, 80 or something like that. And, there's very few people in my life that I just liked immediately. Excuse me. And Bill's like that. I can tell, but I want to tell just a couple quick stories about his positiveness. And there's so many. We were in a hotel somewhere in Michigan. So in the early days before CAD, Bill was the designer and I was the engineer, and we'd go and we'd stand behind a person who knew how to run the CAD machine, because Bill and I didn't know how to run the machine. So it was 3 of us standing behind the machine trying to design a part. And I would say, draw a line a 1/4 inch away from that, parallel to that line. And Bill would say, no, that's not what we want to do. And so and then the person who could do it would have to decide whether to listen to Bill or listen to me in drawing the next line. Of course, eventually you'd ran the machine yourself, but in the beginning that was it. But, it's like when we first met and we started to form what would become IDEO, he said, you're too much of an American. You don't understand European design. So he showed up one day with a ticket, an airline ticket to Europe, and it was so sweet. Later I found out that the company paid for it, but I thought it was from Bill personally. But he was I'm going to say one negative thing, he's a terrible business person. But is part of his charm. In fact, whenever Bill said a number, you just had to take it as put a blank in that space and think there is some number that goes in that space, but it's not the number that Bill spoke, right? We called him incredibly specific but not accurate in the way he's done. So anyway, so I'll stop telling, but there's just so many times. For my 40th, 50th, and 60th birthday, he did videos that must have taken him, tens if not hundreds of hours to make. And everybody has a story like that about something that Bill did to him. But I think the thing I like to say the most about Bill is I never had an interaction with him where I didn't feel better after talking to him. He was a positive person.
So it's funny. It brings up a memory of actually when I took part in the design talk with Bill, and he, we had a rehearsal before it, and I saw some of his slides, and I looked at one of them, and I didn't quite agree with the premise of the slide, but it was Bill. It was Bill's design talk. I didn't want to be an asshole, and so I was just like, Bill, would it be okay if I maybe quibbled a little bit with that? And his whole face lit up. He couldn't imagine how brilliant it would be to have a discussion in which somebody was disagreeing with somebody else, and how amazing that was. And it was so generous of him, and he was so sweet to do that. But it also makes me think that it's part of the philosophy, it seems certainly from the outside of IDEO, is to have multidisciplinary teams of very different points of view and very different types of people on a project in order to specifically nurture and kind of try and harness that type of creative dissonance. And can you talk about that?
Bill never met a person he didn't like, and everybody was interesting, right? So the weirder you were, the more diverse your background was to his, the more interesting you were. And he had no fear. I mean, like, I'm a kind of a nervous person, and Bill's the opposite of that. Like, when we traveled together a lot. I mean, in the early days, we would try to pitch. I was always scared to take Bill with me to a pitch where there was like a real business person on the other side of the table. But as all of you know who have dealt with him at the Cooper-Hewitt, he somehow charms the most difficult business person in his way. But it was just so easy to make things happen. I'll tell you another story. So Bill and I threw dinner parties on consecutive weekends. The same people, basically. Bill and Karen had a little bit different crowd than us, and so for my dinner party on a Saturday, I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning and I started polishing the Satz's dinnerware, and by the time the people came at 7 and the house was clean, I was like irritated that they were coming. It's like. And so there was a reasonable time had. The next weekend, Bill and Karen were having a party at their house on Lincoln, that house, and I got there, and I was the first one there. I'm typically early, and not fashionably late. And I got there, and the party's at 7, and I got there about 7, and Bill was in the back garage working on something, just like working on something. I said, "Bill, I'm here," and he said, "Oh, is it 7 o'clock?" He said, could you go get the chicken at JG&F's? Like, he hadn't thought about the party 1 second, and it was 7 o'clock. And here's the punchline: his party was a lot better than mine.
So I have one final question, and then and by the way, if anyone ever wants to chime in, please do. But Bill described his own career as having 3 phases. He started out being a designer, and then he moved to being a leader of design teams, and then he finally moved on to being a communicator. I'm sure he did all 3 all at the same time. But I wonder if you could talk about his style of leading teams.
Yeah, well, his style was you wanted to please Bill. He was such a sweet person, and he had such vision, and he was inspiring, and so you did it because you wanted to do it for Bill. I mean, like, I never saw it. There's a bunch of these designers who were like, wearing black and, just like really difficult and like, and when you got them into a client, they turned into really difficult people. The client would say something, and they would say, "No, we're not doing that. It's kind of like it's my painting. You can't mess with my painting. And this is exactly the way it's going to be because it's my creation." Anyways, those same people around Bill just wanted to please Bill. I mean, if Bill said, let's paint it green, they said, "Okay, it's Bill. We want to please him." And it had something to do with his design talent. I don't know if you ever saw pictures of his hands, but he had these really soft hands, and when he picked up a pen, it was just this beautiful thing. So he was a great designer. I think that helped. But the fact that Bill got what he wanted done. I mean, he was kind of soft and stuff, but trust me, I was holding the purses, what do they call it, the strings to the purse or whatever, the purse strings, right? And so he always had the latest computer, and his pet projects were always funded because we all wanted to please Bill. So it's a testament to how being a wonderful person and force of personality is another way to motivate people and get things done. It's not like he was holding the carrot or holding the stick. He was just a caring person, and you wanted to please him.
Yeah, beautiful. So Bruce, I wanted to bring you in at this moment, if that's okay. And do you want to? Bruce is a writer, so he gets something of a pass in that he's written down something, and I don't want to make him try and remember it. But if you wanted to read it out now is the time.
Now is the time. Normally, I'm pretty at ease speaking publicly, but tonight I'm rather nervous, so I thought I would write something out, and I did. I need line of sight with Karen. Okay, and I brought a prop. You like it? Okay. So I'll just read this out. I'll try and read it out. So I'm wearing this old cap today because Bill loved it. When Leslie and I met Bill and Karen for dinner after they had moved to New York, it was getting cold that time of year, and I wore this hat. Bill, towering over me, as he did, gave me one of those incredible Bill smiles and gently lifted it off my head and placed it on his. It perched there, a little bit too small, as he beamed. Now, there's nothing much to this hat. It's leather, it's worn, it's old, but as a result of all that, it has great patina. It has a depth, a tangibility, and it's useful. It beckons you. It has a story to tell if you want to take the time to listen. Bill took the time. And not just with my hat, my copper pot as well. We invited Karen and Bill over to our house for Thanksgiving Day parade. He'd never seen one before. And we have a good view of the floats going by from our apartment. Now, Leslie and I have been collecting stuff since our early years in Asia. We have a lot of stuff. We have Chinese blue and white, Korean celadon, Japanese prints, Native American pots and paintings. But the one thing that Bill was attracted to was our old copper pot. We never polish it. It has all the marks of age, discolorations, drip marks. The bottom is bent. In short, it too had character. The wonderful shape, the handle, that patina beckon you. You want to interact with it. You want to engage it. You want to use it. But you wouldn't know any of this if you didn't take the time to actually see the copper pot for what it really is. Bill took the time. He slowed things down, which is pretty unusual in New York City. He took the time to really observe, to really engage. Bill understood the nature of aura. And of course, in his pioneering work, he understood that we can design our interactions with things and actually generate auratic power. But while his professional reputation was built on his incredible ability to understand our connection to things, it was his wonderful ability to connect to us that made Bill so loving and such an object of our love. So I remember when he interviewed me for his book, Designing Media, back in 2008, maybe 2007. We went outside. Now, Bill was remarkable in many ways, and one of them was his desire to master the tools of social media and use them. So he included the interviews on a disc in his printed book, and he did all the camera work and videoing himself. So here's the picture. We're outside someplace. I think it's Chicago. And I sit down in a chair like this. Bill sets up his camera and his stuff, and I start talking into the camera about how my new boss at Business Week walked into my office one day and told me he was closing down the editorial page, which paid my salary, and I had to find something else to do, just like that. So here I am. I'm talking into the camera about launching a new innovation and design channel, and gesticulating, moving my hands, I can't do it right now, getting very, very excited. And 20 seconds into my spiel, vroom, shh. This loud noise overhead drowns me out. We had set up the interview underneath an airport landing path. And a commercial jet drowns me out. So we start again. And I get into how, for the first time in business journalism, we crowdsourced content and went outside the silos and whoosh, boom. The noise drowns me out again. Now, I'm getting pretty nervous. So I say, okay, Bill, let's do it faster, really faster, so we can finish before the next jet flies over. And I really raced through this. How Core 77 saved the day with content and money. How we were editing at the speed of light. And again. Now, those of you who know me very well know that I'm actually a very, very, very nervous person. Probably more nervous than you are. And by this time, my nerves were shot to hell. But not Bill. Even though he had to stop and rewind, and it was his book. And this was his chance to get my interview. Bill was calm. He looked at me and he saw my nervousness, and he quietly talked to me. "Don't worry," he said, putting his hand on my shoulder. "It'll be fine, Bruce. We can splice the bits together later. We can even find another time if this doesn't work." Bill reframed his interaction with me from the guy behind the camera asking the questions to the man understanding my nervousness and offering solace and solution. So I learned Bill's greatest contribution in interaction design was the design of his interactions with people. He took the time to really look and really listen to people. He took the time to slow the time to engage with us. So lately I've been doing some work on deconstructing the nature of experience and engagement between people and products. And I can see the seeds of that work coming from Bill. Yet in the design of his own personal interactions, Bill showed me something much richer. Each of us can beckon people with our interest in their lives, our curiosity in what they do, our appreciation in what they accomplish. Bill beckoned us with that understanding, that charismatic power. In our thoughts of him, in our remembrances, Bill still beckons us, and he always will.
Thank you, Bruce. I do think it's so funny how, we've all been around the block, as it were, but I'm terrified, and Bruce, I know, is also just, was so keen to get this right and not to say the wrong thing, not that there is a wrong thing to say, but thank you, Bruce. So I wanted to move on to Mr. Buxton. And backstage you were saying that you had first met Bill in 1987, I think? And I wonder if you could take us through the story of meeting him and your first interactions.
I guess I was as a client. He was doing some work for Rank Xerox in England, and they asked me to come down and sit in because they didn't have anybody who was comfortable talking to a designer. So as a flake musician in the crowd who played around, and I found it very interesting because it was my first encounter, and they didn't show anything in terms of design. They just started telling stories and then all these images and stuff like that. I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. I know a lot of industrial designers. I've never seen anybody come and do this before to help us make photocopiers. And so it was curious. So I started to push back and stuff like that. And there had an experience a little bit like you. And it's something that I recognized is probably one of the most important things about anybody who's going to be a successful designer of this ilk. And it's fundamental that the ethic of the studio and of the person is that you'd rather be wrong and learn something than feel like you're losing face if you back down on your initial pronouncement. And that takes a certain kind of humility, but also honestly, you can't be performing. And so and this comes to perhaps of my time with him, the best time had nothing to do with design. We both traveled a lot. We met always at conferences and stuff like that, and he was unusual from people from the design community in that he would go to academic and scientific conferences and stuff like that. He was just a sponge for new things. He knew where to, he was a good prospector and also a good miner. And we were both giving a talk at some place, I want to think about it as in southwestern England, in some this kind of quasi-Elizabethan manor house come castle, and with huge sort of pseudo-Gothic arches and the biggest honking billiard table you've ever seen in your life. And we both sucked. Let's be very clear. And we're both guys, though, right? And so if you guys and pool tables, when you're playing snooker on a full-size snooker table, no matter how good you are on a short, small table with big 8-ball balls, you suck when you get onto these tiny balls with small pockets that are the other side of the room there. And therefore you get angry and your ego gets up and you're trying to, because everybody's competitive. There wasn't a competitive bone in his body. It was like, we were just having a great time because there was this guy who came in, sort of like the butler, who was straight out of some Faulty Towers kind of thing, bringing us beer, and we were just drinking warm ale and coming back, and we were left alone, and we just spent the whole evening laughing at how rotten we were, and just telling stories and just that. So it's an understated story. There's no punchline. There's no climax. It's a way of being, and it's a way of being where ego has no place. Enjoyment and curiosity is the only place. And that's how it was. And I think that since he's not around to fight back, I'll just say he's wrong, by the way, about the characterization about these 3 stages of the career. There's a whole other way to look at that. His first part of his career was designing objects, because that's where you start. It's the things, that's the catalyst. The next stage came into the interaction stuff. It's the interaction of people. You can't think about the objects without thinking about the impact on people. In reality, as designers, whether it's physical objects or processes or anything, the product we design isn't the objects of things in the box. It's the experience that they engender. But his third level, what he called the communication stage, that's not what it was. It was realizing, no, it's the design of the culture. And the communication was simply a means to affect the culture, to change that. Understanding that the interactions with you start at the kernel, the object, the interaction with the object, that sits in a social, cultural, political context. And that's what he was actually on about. And there was that progression. And we can talk about how that goes about if you want, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd love you to talk about, do you have memories or examples or stories of Bill in action where you clearly saw him kind of designing the room or designing the atmosphere, designing the environment kind of on the fly?
So I'm going to duck the question, because, and if I may, respectfully, in a sense, I'm trying to take it to a slightly different thing, because in some sense, he was a curator of stories. The 2 books, that's what they were. I mean, some of his own stories are in there as well. And in some sense, telling a story out of the context, the stories, you need a repertoire of stories that fit the audience and the context. So what I tell in a bar with you, if I'm trying to seduce you, as opposed to over on the soccer field or something like that, they're going to be different, right? It's just how we do this. And so finding the right story, it wasn't they were good stories, they were the right stories for the audience and the purpose. But I want to just do this in a certain way. I think all great designers, and Brian Shackle, who was an English sort of father of human factors in HCI in the UK, said this to me, but Bill fits this perfectly. He said, when I asked him what distinguished the people really successful from those, he said something I thought was really insightful. He said, they have a deep sensitivity to materials and tools and working with their hands. At the same time, they have the ability to go meta and view things at a level of abstraction. And Bill was able to do that. He kept grounded from the materials. It's like the story with the guitar, the story in the machine shop about coming in and the feel of the materials and doing that. So that keeps you honest. And there's lots of people who have that, but they don't have the ability to go abstract. And so by going meta, then you start saying, well, how do you, what are the issues and how do you communicate that to different audience? And stories are a critical way to do that. I guess I would put it this way, is that, say a picture's worth 1,000 words, I'd say a good story is worth 1,000 pictures. And good stories are the original form of viral marketing. And if you do the stories in an egoless way, then other people can make the stories their own. And that's where the viral nature comes. And that's how you change the culture. And I think that that's what he cared about in the third phase more than anything, was how do you affect social change and the cultural change. And there's a historian of technology named Melvin Kranzberg, and he has this, his first law is technology is not good, it's not bad, but nor is it neutral. It will be some combination of good or bad. Bill understood that. And he understood that without informed design, it's more likely to fall on the bad side than the good side. And he understood that you cannot make design decisions, because design is making choice, right? Without taking a stand. Every decision has consequences. You are designing society if you introduce a toothpick into the culture. And the question is, if you don't have a moral compass and a value around that, then how do you know which side of the balance you're on? And the one word, in some sense, that I feel strongly, really strongly, and that the word hasn't appeared, but it pervades everything anybody said about him this evening and other times, is he was ethical. And there was an ethic and a value system that he communicated, and he understood that the first priority is you design the culture, the second priority is you design the process, and the third thing is the product. And if you get the first two right, the third one's going to pop out. And you need some kind of moral, ethical compass. And so not only did he just charm, he was a charming man, but people trusted him because he was honest, and they trusted his value system.
I think that's so beautiful. David, I'd actually like to ask you, does that resonate with you? Does that make sense for what you were doing at IDEO?
No, completely. I mean, Bill's a large part of IDEO's culture, which is, our value system is not particularly about business. It's not particularly about, just the content. It's more about, having this kind of, view of people and having impact on people's lives that's positive. That's why IDEO and Bill really resonate with this kind of young people that are now more about social value than they are about profit. And so that's kind of how design thinking got started, in our world. So I think that Bill's ethics, Bill's values, have been in our company and at Stanford and every place else that he touched. And they're very strong, and it's really interesting how long it takes to go away. I'll just say, Bill ran the London office. Well, that's where he started. And when I go there, it's like there's like 19 people have been the head of our London office since Bill was there. But it feels exactly the same value system because it's so right that people just resonate with it. It's not that he was charmed. It's just that his value system so resonates with people that they adopt it as their own.
It's a beautiful segue, so thank you both, to Ellen, and talking about Bill's work at the Cooper-Hewitt, where I know that he was incredibly keen to build, the culture that everyone here has been talking about. And I wonder if you could talk about what he did when he came into the Cooper-Hewitt.
Yeah, well, certainly I think. Thank you. What a gentleman, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Certainly, speaking to your point of that perhaps his final phase was to recreate culture, what better way to do that than to become director of a museum, right? And what a beautiful gift to society to make that move into really what's public service. For some of the time, we've been renovating, as you've all heard, and there was a period of time where much of the staff was working in trailers in our beautiful garden at Cooper-Hewitt. And of course, Bill was the director and had a wonderful office. And it was a little bit of a Downton Abbey thing where, he had this great drawing room and we would be in the scullery there in these trailers with, the paneling and the whole 9 yards. And one day I walked into the trailer and Bill was sitting at a desk in the trailer with his laptop, and I'm like, Bill, why are you in the trailer? You're better than that. And he was like, well, I'm doing an experiment. I'm working in the trailer, so I can know what it's like to be here with all of you. And that was his philosophy of design, that he believed that the designer had to have empathy with the people using the products. And if that meant lying on the ground and pretending that you're fixing an airplane or whatever, putting on heavy gloves so that you could feel what it's like to have arthritis and try to dial a BlackBerry, he wanted to really understand what it was like to be a user, right? And that's part of what he created. And when he came to the museum, he asked us, the curators, the educators, the staff, to think about not just what we wanted to say intellectually, but what kind of experience did we want our users of the museum to have? What did we want when people come back, when we reopen our beautiful galleries in 2014? What will people do? What will they experience? Not just what do we want to say. Curators have a lot to say, and we're always thinking of the next show and the next argument and the next piece of scholarship we want to unleash upon the waiting world. And Bill was like, wait, step back, and we have to think about the people that come through our doors as users, and we have to empathize with them. And that idea of empathy, I think, is what I get above and beyond from all of his writing and all of his teaching and the lectures and what he's contributed. To me, that idea of empathy is really profound, and he demonstrated it through his life constantly.
I think it's something that the Cooper-Hewitt has been talking about, is these people-centered galleries. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what that really means.
Well, one of the exhibitions that we'll be doing when we reopen is an exhibition dedicated to Bill. And it's an exhibition that will explore the idea of human-centered design as a theme in the last decades of design, and something that's really evolved from a kind of ergonomic point of view to a more interaction design point of view, and then to a current moment more about hacking and the user becoming part of the design process and not only the subject of the design process. And the show is called Beautiful Users. And to me, that, what was Bill, right? He was, and my prop is tissues. Bill was beautiful. He was physically beautiful. He was emotionally beautiful. And he is one of the designers who created this notion of the user as the center. And so that's an exhibition where we'll be able to engage visitors in the design process and in thinking about how they use objects and how a certain philosophy of design is oriented around understanding what users want and how they behave.
So actually, Bill, I'd like to ask you, given that user experience has been your field for so many years, what do you think the other Bill's legacy will be in terms of user experience?
By far, well, it sort of works, yeah. I think by far his legacy is the people he influenced, and that spreads that way. And by the way, that's nice because the combinatorics work out really nicely. He did the clamshell laptop. It's great, nice work, but that pales in comparison to the influence in terms of the culture. What's interesting is that cultures like stories, if you get it right, this is how I learned this lesson, but it is that as soon as I moved out of this rarefied environment where I lived in this world of this special culture, because I took it for granted, I didn't realize it was special. I thought everybody worked in this sort of rarefied world, and then I was confronted with the real world, and I said, holy cow, what the hell is this? And I moved back and said, what's changed, what's happening? And from then on,
when you had left where?
When I left the University of Toronto, I was in a very special lab, and I went to work for a company, and I didn't stay very long. And that's when I learned that lesson, that it's like jumping into cold water when you thought that everybody lived in warm water. I think that the people who have been immersed in the culture that Bill was instrumental in creating around IDEO, but not just there, in the design community, because he was very much a spokesperson. And just as you did at the museum, he in this third phase, once you're in that, it's like Cracker Jacks. The more you eat, the more you want. You're not going to get out of there. You're not going to be content being in something different because it's worse. And it's contagious. And that's why the story is important. How do you make forming this type of attitude, this approach that's open to ideas and open to creativity and so on, that's contagious, and that's the vital part. And I think that's the really strong legacy.
David, any thoughts on his legacy?
Yeah, I was going to say that's Bill's the reason that IDEO is really open about what we do and our methodology and so forth. I mean, if you were a business person, you wouldn't publish if you're the leader in the industry, you wouldn't publish all of your methods and everything you do and your insights and stuff. But Bill always wanted to do that, and so that's a part of our culture. So you can find out anything. We'll make our method cards available or talk about it. And there's no secrets. I mean, it's real easy to get into IDEO's culture and understand, and that's Bill. And one time I said to him, "You sure this is the right thing to do? Like tell everybody our latest insight about how you do user testing or whatever." And he said, "Yeah, we got to get better."
Yeah. See, I think it's because he's English, and I say it because there's this. No, this is the weird thing about it. This is one of the conversations. This is the problem with people leave prematurely. You miss the chance to dig at them and also to play with. But that's what England did during the period of exploration and empire. All their maps, Cook, when he came back, all of their maps and Vancouver's maps, the English, as a matter of policy, the British Admiralty published all those maps, so the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the Dutch knew where they'd been, where they hadn't been, how to get there. And it didn't hurt the empire. The empire hurt the police as anyhow, that's a whole other story.
But
Move it on. It was good business, but for England, anyhow. But the point is that maybe he absorbed that culturally too.
He's been the same way with the museum and pushing us to share our objects online and share our toys with the public and not be protective of our secrets, but to understand that by making the knowledge of design more broad, it's good for what we do.
But I think that was a quid pro quo. What's interesting about the two books is they're history books. He had a fascination with history. That's why it made sense for him to go to the Cooper-Hewitt. He understood in this world where everybody thinks, I want to be the person who invented X, I'm the one, I'm the genius, I did this thing, and it's all about invention and that's success. And he understood that research, this recherche, it's about the past. You need to know the history of the past in order to create the history of the future. And that means you're the beneficiary of that history. He understood, respected that. He was a scholar in that sense of design and of these things. And if you're going to take from the past, you have to feed the future. And I think he understood, I know he understood that as a kind of quid pro quo.
For sure. So I have a feeling that we could probably talk about Bill for many days, if not weeks, up here, but I'll spare you, and I'm sure there are many conversations to be had in the audience. I did just want to conclude with one story of my own, which actually happened last summer at the opening for the Graphic Design Now in Production show, which Ellen curated. And I bumped into Bill when I was there, and we sat down. It was the most perfect New York evening. It was just beautiful, like really sunny, but not too hot, so an English person could cope and still sit in the sun. And we sat down at a picnic table, and we all kind of dug our feet in the man-made beach that apparently is at Governor's Island that we had no idea about, and we were all talking shop and telling stories, and Bill was talking about cycling around Manhattan, how many different places, he had been and was still to go. And I might read this bit because this is the point. And even then I marveled at Bill's incredible joy at all that was around him. He was a man who clearly took such pleasure from the world, who retained a twinkling curiosity for everything, who remained at all times kind, open, and approachable. I loved learning from Bill, as I did once more that night, and I will be forever grateful that his spirit shone on my and all of our lives. In the name of his legacy, let us aspire to adopt even some of his qualities and twinkle with curiosity in our own ways. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Bill. Thanks, everyone.
Mm-hmm.